Hello, AP Stat students. Today's lesson is an introduction to experiments. And experiments are the one way you can prove causation, where you can say that one variable actually causes another. And this would obviously be a big thing to do, to be able to say that the presence of a certain variable causes a response. Like take this medicine and your illness goes away, or take this medicine and your blood pressure decreases, etc. So that's the goal, to be able to prove that one thing causes another. Before that happens, we usually do what's called an observational study. And this is where we observe individuals and measure a variable of interest, but do not attempt to influence the responses. It's not possible to determine causal relationships between variables using data collected in an observational study. But an observational study is usually the first step before an experiment. So, for instance, we may notice that there is a relationship between two variables, x and y, and we find a least square regression line between them, and we say, wow, there looks like there's a positive, strong linear association between these two variables. But we are not allowed to say, remember, that variable x causes variable y. Okay? So a linear regression, this is an example of an observational study. Okay, but it's really the first step to an experiment. Because once we notice that there is an association, then we could say, all right, I'm going to have two groups of people that I choose randomly, or split up randomly, and I'm going to give this group a low level of x, and this group a high level of x, and then I'm going to see what happens. Do I get a different response? Do low levels of x cause this, and high levels of x cause this? That would be an experiment, okay? So the idea is an observational study is really the first step, where we say, I think this variable might cause this. But then we would design and run an experiment where we manipulate how much of x you get and see what happens. So observational studies are a key part of this. There are two types of observational studies, a prospective study or a retrospective study. In a prospective study, we identify subjects and follow them into the future collecting data. Okay. So maybe we have a bunch of people that have high blood pressure, so we prescribe a medication for them, and then follow them for a few months of checkups to see if their high blood pressure is getting better. A retrospective study might be to identify those people with high blood pressure and ask them about their habits, like how many people are smokers, how many people have bad diets, how many people don't exercise, how many people have a history with their family, that kind of thing. So we'd ask subjects questions about their past. In both of those, though, we're not attempting to control any variables. We're not looking at different groups of people. We're just observing what happens. Okay. So in an observational study, treatments are not imposed. Investigators examine data for a sample of individuals in retrospective, or follow a sample of individuals into the future collecting data in prospective, in order to investigate a topic of interest about the population. A sample survey is a type of observational study that collects data from a sample in an attempt to learn about the population from which the sample was taken. Okay, so in an observational study, we're just observing. We're just collecting data. We're not attempting to influence the results. We're not attempting to manipulate anything. We're just looking. In an experiment, we deliberately impose some treatment on individuals in order to observe their responses. Okay, so we're going to do something to the patients. Okay, and what we're going to do is manipulate what's called the explanatory variable. So the explanatory variable is the x variable. Okay, it's the variable that changes in an experiment. Okay, it's also called the independent variable. You would think of it, I'm sure you've heard the word treatment before. Okay, So the treatments are the x variable. The response variable is the y variable, the variable being measured in an experiment, also called the dependent variable. Okay. And what we're hoping for is causation. In other words, that the presence of variable x causes something to happen to y, okay? Or changes in variable x directly cause changes in variable y, like that's what we're hoping. You can't tell that just from a correlation because we're not manipulating anything. But in an experiment, we're going to give one group a certain level of x and another group a different level of x, and we're going to see what happens to those two groups. See if we can replicate what happened in the correlation. And we have to be careful for confounding variables. Okay, we're hoping to say that one variable causes something else, but sometimes there's other variables that might be the actual cause. And when we get confused or we can't tell which variable is causing it, we say we have confounding variables. So when two variables are associated in such a way that the effects on the response variable cannot be distinguished from each other. So for instance, let's say that I think GPA causes your ACT score. So like a low GPA would cause you to get a low ACT score. A high GPA might cause you to get a high ACT score. There are other factors such as study, sleep, how much food you ate for breakfast or did you eat breakfast, how much stress you're experiencing can make you not think clearly, your overall health, your overall intelligence, which I spelled wrong. So there are many things that go into, or other variables that might cause your ACT score to go up or down, okay? When I can't tell, was it your GPA or was it one of these other things, it means I'm confused over which variable is the cause, and that's when I have confounding variables. So that's one thing we want to look out for is confounding variables, and we can control for that in the way we set up our experiment, and we will get to that in our next lesson. So there's some terms that go along with experiments. Remember, the definition of an experiment is a study in which researchers deliberately impose treatments on individuals to measure their response. So the experimental units are a collection in which treatments are applied. So you might be doing your experiment on fabric for a couch, like which fabric holds up longer. You might be doing your experiment on growing conditions for tomato plants, where the tomato plants are the subjects, or the experimental units. You might be doing something on people, on like blood pressure, or headaches, or cancer treatment. So experimental units is just who are the people in your experiment. If you're experimenting on people, then we call the experimental units subjects. Okay, so experimental units is kind of the generic term for who you're doing your experiment on, but if your experiment is on human beings, we call the experimental units the subjects. The factors in your experiment are the x variables. They're the big picture variables, the explanatory variables. Sometimes there's only one variable we're interested in, but sometimes we'll have multiple variables that we are concerned with. You can think of the factors as being part of the treatments. The levels in an experiment are different values the factors can take on. So for instance, if we were doing an experiment on tomato plants and we were manipulating fertilizer as the variable, we might have, say, 3 different brands of fertilizer. Okay, so the factor would be fertilizer type, and the levels would be which brand you get. Or the factor might be fertilizer, and the levels might be how much fertilizer you give them. Like maybe you do 1 cup a week for one group, 2 cups a week for another group, and then none for a third group. So factors are big picture. What are the variables I'm looking at? And then the levels are, am I using different amounts of the factors? And then the treatments are just a combination of factors and levels. And it's the specific condition applied to experimental units. If a study has several explanatory variables or factors, and the treatments are combinations of levels and factors. So here's an example of an experiment. A consumer group wants to test the effectiveness of a new organic laundry detergent and make recommendations to customers about how to best use the product. They intentionally get grass stains on 40 white t-shirts in order to see how well the detergent will clean them. They want to try the detergent in cold water and in hot water on both the regular and delicate wash cycles. So we'd identify the following. The subjects are the 40 white t-shirts. Okay. The factors, the number of levels of each. The factors are water temperature and wash cycle. And inside each of those, like for water temperature, there were 2 levels, hot and cold. And for the wash cycles, there were 2 cycles, regular and delicates. Okay, so the factors are the wash temperature and wash cycle, the water temperature and wash cycle, and the levels are whether you have hot or cold water, whether you have regular or delicate wash cycle. So for the number of treatments, there are 4, because there are 2 wash temperatures times 2 wash cycles. Which is going to be 4 groups altogether. So you would do hot water with regular wash cycle. You would do hot water with the cold, or the delicate wash cycle. And then we would do cold water with the regular wash cycle. And we would do cold water with the delicate wash cycle. Okay, and then we would basically choose 10 t-shirts to go in each treatment group. So we choose 10 here, 10 here, 10 here, and 10 here. And we would randomly assign the t-shirts to those different groups. And we'll talk about how to do that in our next lesson. But we basically put 10 t-shirts in each group. Then we'd wash the t-shirts under each condition. And then at the end, we would investigate, inspect the shirts and see which shirts got the cleanest. Okay. Now there may be some confounding variables in this, possibly. Let's say that when you bought the 40 t-shirts, you bought 20 that were cotton. But you could only find 20, so you bought 20 that were polyester. So now you have 2 different kinds of t-shirts. So maybe at the end, after you did the experiment, maybe you found out that, the cotton t-shirts were the ones that were in the hot water, and the polyester ones were the ones I put in the cold. Okay, and it looks like the hot water ones got cleaner, but was it because of the hot water, or was it because those were where I put the cotton t-shirts? So we have to be careful. We'd want to make sure that the 40 white t-shirts were made of the same material. Okay, so that's what we mean by confounding variables, where is there another variable in the problem that might have caused the results, etc. So good luck with design experimental vocab.